So it's time for a second Vestri video and time to do some more polishing of this thing. But if you're wondering why so soon, there's so many questions came up from my original Vestri video that I thought I'd go through some of them. And I also got out my container of random dongle DACs and I did some comparative listening. So we get to hear what the shit Vestri is like compared to, well, at least what I have here. I haven't got everything here despite people believing I have heard everything. So I'm going to do what I can with some of the old popular ones and some that are maybe slightly less well known. But anyway, the Vestri itself, you have to remember, is literally a mesh DAC card for putting in one of, Shit Audio's amps condensed into a dongle DAC. And that means some of the design choices were weird, like who needs phase inversion on a dongle DAC? Why aren't the gain levels? Well, literally because they didn't really program it much more than what you get if you open up the Forkbeard app on your phone or whatever and connect it to the mesh DAC card. It's literally the same functionality. And that's, and so that results in some interesting, design choices, but it explains a lot. And remember, it's $99 and a lot of these things are way more expensive. Quick stop the press as I checked the Shit Happen thread, and apparently there's been a little bit of a change to the firmware of the Vestri, so that because customers had complained that the volume had ramped up maybe when they put it face back onto a phone or the like. So what they've done is the newest Vestris, if you touch the outer twomost buttons for 2 seconds, it will lock the screen so that you can't accidental touches won't cause the volume to change or whatever. Now, if you have bought a Vestri and you want that feature and you don't have it, what you do is you contact Shit and you send back your one and they'll send you a new one. It's not something you can update the firmware of yourself. So that's just a little thing I wanted to add there. One feature they have added so far. And the reason for the outer two buttons, Jason explained, is to prevent, it accidentally being activated by touching two adjacent buttons at the same time. One of the other things I did is I actually didn't use the included USB cable. I noticed some comments on it on HeadFi and the like. And if you're wondering why I have weird cable setups here, it's because I used two USB-C cables from actually a Vornix lab grade hub from my Mac Mini for comparing things, and I didn't actually use this cable, and nobody spotted the fact that I was not using the Shit Audio cable when I was in my hotel room in Singapore either, for the one photo that I think I included in the middle of the review, simply because it was on the desk at the time that the Vestri was handed to me. But this cable was actually for use with the Woo Audio Tube Mini, because connecting through this adapter from the USB cable, it wasn't connecting reliably, and I think this adapter is kind of one of those cheap things off Amazon, but yeah, it's less about that the better. But anyway, the interesting thing about the USB-C cable, which is extremely boring, is that it has a very tight connector. And that's actually a good thing, because that means Shit Audio went out of their way to find a very good and tight USB connector on both ends of the Vestri and in the cable, and means that it should be reliable. Now, the other thing about gain levels is something I touched on, but not really. I was level matching these between, the Vestri between, various dongle DACs, and noticed, of course, that the decibel level jump for each volume step was 2 dB, where it's usually about 1 dB or half a dB in some of the FiiO devices. And that's quite a jump. And I noticed that, of course, with the Andromedas, with full-sized headphones, it's not such an issue. But 2 dB is a lot. And of course, not having a gain control, and I think happily they could replace the phase thing with the gain control because none is programmed in, that the volume jumps are larger than usual. Now about that, you're probably wondering, well, why didn't they program something like that? Well, you've got to think about it from Shit Audio's point of view. They have, designed their first actual proper dongle DAC, and with a 4.4mm socket, which was in one of the takes that didn't make it in, and I forgot to mention it again in the video, which is really dumb. But it's their first device, and they have no idea if anyone's going to buy it. The hints that I've heard from them is that they actually generated a lot of interest, and going by the explosion on my video, I think that a lot of you were interested in it as well, hence the follow-up. So here are some of my thoughts on, well, the Vestri versus the rest of the world, or at least what bits of it I could assemble. So we've got to kind of load up dongle DACs into types. So we'll take something like this W2 which is what I call a generic Cirrus Logic, phone DAC type DAC. It uses essentially uses a low power DAC used often in phones, at least the ones that still have audio output, And it's basic and does the job, and it sounds smooth and nice and is quite tolerable. But this, of course, will have better circuitry, so maybe be a little bit better. Hard to say. They all have a color everything with this, yeah, over smoothness and maybe kind of some degree of lack of detail. Compare that, of course, to the Vestri, where you're just going to get more detail and clarity and openness and more reality, I can't speak today, reality to the sound than you would out of the usual Cirrus Logic ones. Now, the equivalent of that, of course, is an ESS-based thing, say like the KA17 or the BTR5 or BTR whatever, depending on what BTR whatever FiiO is up to at the moment, and they too have their own generic sound where they sound, kind of etchy and sharp and maybe a little bit, false clear. And again, so you have smooth, over sharp, and in comparison, you don't have that same coloration with the Vestri because even though it is using an ESS-based DAC, it has that digital filter and setup that make it sound, make the music, I should say, sound more like actual music and more like actual instruments with a lot of detail, and so it handily beats out these things. So that's your basic level of dongle DAC. Then you have other things such as battery-powered stuff. You have RU9, which a lot of people asked about it, even though it's completely the different type of thing. Well, almost. As a side note, people have asked about how does this compare to the Mojo 2. The Mojo 2 is in another universe. It is a whole other level up above these things. We're not going there. It's just, don't even compare them. I mean, for every way under the sun, it has vastly more processing power and a vastly longer history of design than any of this stuff. So yeah, it's a whole other world above. And I mean, if I listened to a Mojo 2 before listening to the Vestri, I would not want to listen to the Vestri. But first thing in the morning when I actually did my listening comparisons, when I had my brain clear and free of things like the DCS stack and the Hugo and the TT2 and all that, which are just out of shot of this video, then I could actually enjoy the Vestri and the other products as well. Now, of this, we have a device that is a 4493 DAC from AKM, which is their kind of low mid-range. They call it high. They call everything high-end, but it's not. It is a pretty good DAC as things go, but 4493s tend to be like, if you're sensitive like me to violins, piano, cymbals and that, and you suddenly, occasionally in the music, you kind of cringe a little bit. It's like, yeah, not quite what's supposed to be, but still is pretty good most of the time. And I took this with me to the earphone Portafest, Portable Audio Festival in Tokyo, and put it on the back of my phone and fed it through RUNARC a whole lot of DSD and DXD to bypass the terrible digital filters, which, well, the average digital filters that are in this thing. But its kind of call to fame, of course, is the tubes and a warmer sound. So it has a kind of warmish, more closed-in sound, especially with the tube mode engaged, because the tube modes will either make it sound narrower or narrower still in the classic tube mode. And so you have more crosstalk. And so compared to the Vestri, which sounds more open, wide, and yeah, basically a bit more realistically natural, despite my attempts to use DSD and DXD with the RU9. But of course, I'm not comparing power in this because the RU9 has a battery, it has extra power input options, so you can actually make this thing really rock out versus the Vestri, which, as I explained in my review, will hit a hard limit on especially music with low bass rumble turned right up, like movie soundtracks. That is the main limitation. And I'm not going to talk about power too much for the rest of these because I wasn't going to spend hours and hours going through the different power requirements of each of them and what their limits were. It was just going to end up being way too long. So the RU9, more kind of warm, closed in, Vestri more open and genuinely clear, not fake sharpness clear that you get out of some ESS designs. So that's that one. Now then you get into the kind of weird ass exotic things. We have, well, cleverly the 4 phone DACs combined together in parallel W4. That's not far off the QX13, I think. It still has, well, it sounds like 4 Cirrus Logic phone DACs in parallel. Basically, there's more detail, but just basically a W2 with a lot more detail. So in that, same thing with the Vestri, it sounds, instead of the coloration of the 4 phone DACs, you have genuine detail and resolution and naturalness coming through with that open and clear sound that you get. But still, I like the W4 a lot, and they have a version now, the ACG or AGC version, which is $4.99, and yeah, it's got a fancy copper case, polished copper, and some fancy electronics in there. I have no idea. I'm curious about it, but I don't think they'll send me one It's a limited edition anyway. And at $499, $99, and I think the $99 DAC sounds better. But, and a huge but, God, I want this. I want this. Jason, do it. Put a twiddly thing on the next version, please. I want this. It's so nice. Yeah, I know that these rotary encoders are evil and the spawn of Satan and all that, but I still want one. Right, that out of the way. And cool design language. Now, they're the exotic weird-ass stuff from Cayin, the RU6 and RU7, which I'll hold the right way up so the Cayin logo is correct. The RU6 was the first R2R dongle DAC, and it required some weird compromises to work. For a start, it had to have a volume control that used two 10 resistor relay ladders, one being, each 10 steps switching into the next, switching back to the beginning with the second set of resistors. So every 10 steps, it would kind of cut out for a second because you were switching back to the beginning of the relay again. And and that because using regular digital truncation or whatever with an R2R DAC is bad, as anyone who's ever plugged an RU6 into a phone and used the phone's digital volume can attest, it just makes things sound awful. Then, of course, they had the RU7, which converts everything to DSD. And that is its own unique thing, which using a DSD conversion chip, which I didn't know existed until I got this thing in. Yeah, well, the RU6, if I plugged that in first thing in the morning and I was listening to Wildwood by Paul Weller, and that's a lovely track, and I thought this sounds really nice, and I really like how R2R DACs present things, but of course there's a little bit of bloom in the mid-range, and the other thing is, actually, when I switched to the Vestri was actually smoother, but more detailed. And I felt like the RU6 had a little bit of harshness, actually. I mean, you don't notice it if you listen to it on its own, but when you compare, it's rather like the Mimir is compared to the Bifrost 2. It cleans things up, but without losing, it doesn't become sharp and edgy in sound, unlike, say, a regular ESS DAC, and sounds more natural. But the RU6, it made sound kind of a little bit harsh, actually, which is a real shock. And a little bit, of course, bloomy in the mid-range, regardless if you have the oversampling mode on or off. It sounded, actually, the RU6 sounds more distorted, and you do have a less distorted sound from the Vestri, but without that kind of artificial edginess that you do get with say, some DACs. It was very interesting. It was rather a surprise. So definitely a win on the Vestri there and wider soundstage too. Now, the RU7 is basically a variation of colouring everything with one particular colour. Now, initially, again, listening to Paul Weller, it sounded, oh, that sounds nice and smooth, but the parts of the music that you want to be sharp and snappy aren't sharp and snappy, they're just smoothed over. And that's a result of a basic DSD upsampling. You need a really excellent modulator to not get that, and that requires serious horsepower, which you're just not going to put in a dongle DAC. So it makes everything, some people like everything smoothed over, but again, it's just like a different coloration, rather like the Cirrus Logic DAC smooth over everything, well, sort of. The Cayin the RU7 really does smooth over edges and of instruments and that, and it's too much for me. Some people like it, but it's just too much for, especially the music I listen to, where when the music's sharp, I want it to be sharp. And then, of course, you have the last one, which is the really wacky stuff, like the Wu Audio Tube Mini. And I really love this thing, even though it has basically an ESS phone DAC in there and a couple of tubes, and has those weird, it can't be used with in-ear monitors. And it's, you'll send a large pop through your headphones as you got to do a certain sequence of plugging it in. You plug in your headphones, you switch it to SE if you want to plug into balanced, then you plug in your headphones, then you plug in the USB, and then you switch it to balanced. Otherwise, you get a massive pop through your headphones. If it's all plugged in and going and you plug in your headphones with it switched in, you get a massive pop through your headphones, which is no good. And I was using Dan Clark Audio's E3s for the most part. And yeah, I mean, that I just kept the sequence on. It's weird, but I love the sound through the thing, even though if it does have a basic ESS DAC sound through it, which is a little bit actually flat sounding. And it's one that I can use with HQ Player out of my computer, and that actually makes it sound good. But again, without needing the tube sound, the Vestri just sounded nicer overall. It just kind of fixed the issues that the ESS DACs have when it doesn't get covered in fingerprints. And yeah, just nicer overall. So that's why I said the Vestri ends up kind of beating out all my dongle DACs and all the old classics too. It just does the nice bits without doing the nice bits about sounding smooth and clear and detailed without needing any kind of coloration or special tone or tubes or whatever. It just does that right. And I agree with what other people have said where they thought it sounds a little bit dry and it's not as smooth and easygoing sounding as, say, an M33 DAP, for example, or other devices like a Mojo 2, for example. But I mean, it has that characteristic of making me enjoy listening to music. I like the sound better than pretty much everything on this desk. And I'd have to do some, yeah, basically if I'm going to, the Vestri is going to be staying on my desk and I'm going to be putting all the dongle DACs back in my plastic drawer to hang around for the occasional comparison. I mean, you can pick up some of them, the famous ones like the RU6 pretty cheaply these days on the RU7, but not the W4, funnily enough. But I think that, I mean, they just limited doing special editions now. It'd be interesting to try that AGC one. But, I mean, they still cost pretty much double or more. I don't know what a W2 costs now, or the KA17. Well, kind of double or more than the Vestri, which is pretty epic. So I hope that in the future they do something like, I would love it if they made an RU9 competitor with a battery and crap loads of power and fork beard and all that. But I'm absolutely sure that Jason Stoddard will be thrilled out of his pants to source and work with large quantities of lithium-ion batteries. And that was, yeah, absolutely no, he wouldn't. So I don't think that would ever come. But if the Vestri sells like hotcakes and they decide to go deep into programming a more serious Vestri, I'm all in, because the sound quality with some features and maybe some kind of screen or some kind of indication or in-button system. I would love buttons on this. I think they were designing it so that it had minimal holes for water or whatever to get in, or low chance of longevity more than anything. I hope they can do something serious in the future with the Vestri and make it more useful for portable, as I think it's still a pretty kick-ass little unit for what they've done. As always, thanks to Bloom Audio. If you see me at CanJam, come by and say hi, and let me know what you found or you think I should check out while I'm there. Anyway, as always, thanks once again for watching, and I look forward to seeing you at CanJam.